Hey, I was going to say good morning. My clock is off. I have COVID.
Morning's good.
It's morning somewhere. You're in the wrong room. We were all supposed to be there in person. No, hello. How's everyone?
Cool, thank you.
Cool, literally. That's good. That's good. I just got back from San Diego yesterday. And I had symptoms, found out I was COVID positive when I got home. So keeping everybody safe.
Well,
Sorry about that.
my son is currently trying to get back from Edinburgh, and the weather there was cool and wet. He was looking forward to the Portland weather.
Yes. Great. I don't know where we are now as far as Connor. How are we looking on your end?
Hi, Chair. We do not quite have a quorum yet. I know we were expecting a couple more folks to show up here in person, but it sounds like they may have gotten stuck in traffic. If you'd like, we can get started with the roll, and I can let you know how we're doing on a quorum at the end of that.
Yeah, let's go ahead and get started. That'll be great.
Okay. I'll go ahead and start the recording, and then we'll have a short safety video played for our in-person attendees.
Recording in progress.
I'm Justin Dunlap, and I'm the department head stagehand electrician at the Arlene Schnitzer Concert Hall. Safety is a big part of my job. From electrical, making sure that I stay up to date on the NFPA codes and regulations, to rigging, where we make sure that everything is safely suspended overhead, to egress, ensuring that our audiences, performers, and technicians have the safest possible route in case of emergency. I'm out here at the Arlene Schnitzer Concert Hall, and you're in the Metro Regional Center. Please note that we're on the 3rd floor of the building. In the event of a fire or fire alarm, please exit through the door in the northeast corner of the room. Go down the steps to the 2nd floor and exit through the main entrance by the reception desk. We will meet in the courtyard outside that entrance. In the event of a medical or fire emergency, please call 911 and notify the security agent at the front desk. The nearest defibrillator is mounted on the steps leading from the reception desk down to Grand Avenue.
All right. With that, I'll go ahead with your permission, Chair, get started on the roll.
Please do. Thank you, Connor.
All right. Let's see. I know that, let's see, Commissioner Sharon Mirren let me know that they wouldn't be able to make it, as I don't see Commissioner Carmen Rubio yet. Mayor Brian Cooper let me know that he wouldn't be able to make it, and the same with Director Terry Grigsby. Citizen of Multnomah County, Omar Katub, will be joining us a little bit later tonight, if he is not already here. Yep. Let's see, I believe Commissioner Mark Schull will not be joining. Mayor Joe Buck.
I am here. Good evening.
Good evening. Mayor Denise McGriff.
Hi, everybody. It was a little tough to come in and out of that sun, but I'm here.
And we're very glad you are. Thank you. Council President Brett Sherman.
I am here. Thank you.
Good evening. Commissioner Sherry French.
Hello, everyone.
Ed Gronke.
Here, thank you.
And we do have Commissioner Pam Treese, I think just grabbing some dinner, but for the record, Commissioner Treese is here. Mayor Steve Calloway.
Present.
Yep, is present. Councilor Nadia Hassan.
Hello, everyone. I'm here.
Good evening. We also have Mayor Tim Rosner is also present and grabbing dinner. Vice President Gordon Hovey's. I don't think has joined us yet. Luis Nava. Thomas Kim.
I'm here. Thank you, Connor.
Thank you. Laura Kelly.
I'm here serving as alternate for Kirsten Green. Thank you.
Good evening. Councilor Glenn Young.
I'm here.
There we go. Thank you, Councilor. Is Councilor Kim Harless.
Present.
Alex Howard.
Hello, I'm here.
I do not see Mayor Brian Hodson yet. Let's see, we have Councilor Duncan Wong.
Present. Good evening.
Good evening. And we also will have Councillor Rosenthal shortly, but it's not made it quite yet. And Councillor Nolan will not be able to join us this evening. All right, let's see. I will confirm with Roger, but I don't think that we have a quorum.
Yeah, we're still short of a quorum.
Okay. I'll continue to let people in for now, Chair. Most of our items are information and discussion items, and the committee can still receive information and discuss that, even without a quorum, but we won't be able to act on our consent agenda. I can let you know a little bit later if we do hit a quorum, though, in the meeting.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Connor. And I was looking forward to being there this afternoon, but I'm under the weather. Thank you, Metro, for hosting everyone that's in person. As a reminder, we're going to move into public communications on MPAC items. As a reminder, public comment may be submitted in writing and will also be heard by electronic communication. Written comments should be submitted electronically by emailing legislativecoordinator@oregonmetro.gov. Written comments received by 4 p.m. on Tuesday, June 27th have been provided to us, the committee, in advance of this meeting today. If you have not already signed up to testify, you can sign up by virtually raising your hand. Those calling in on phone can raise their hands by dialing *9. Those using the Zoom app on their cell phone or computer can raise their hand by selecting the raise hand button along the bottom of the control bar. Connor, is there anyone here to testify?
Thank you, Chair Jones-Dixon. We have not had anybody sign up in advance to testify, but if anybody in the audience would like to sign up now, they can do so by hitting the raise hand button. Depending on your version of Zoom, the raise hand button is either at the bottom of your screen or within the reactions tab. So I'll just give folks in our Zoom audience another couple of seconds to get their hands up if they would like to testify. I will just note for the record also that we do have Amira Streeter here, who is the alternate for Omar Khattab. And with that, I do not see any hands going up, Chair Jones-Dixon.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Connor. We'll move on to Councillor Wong to provide the council update.
Oh, I think it's Councillor Rosenthal's turn this month, and I don't have talking points. So maybe we can wait a few minutes when Councillor Rosenthal arrives.
Yeah, we can do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. We can come back to Councillor Rosenthal. Let's move on to the committee member communication. Now on to the committee member communications. Do we have any members of the committee that have updates that they would like to share? If so, please raise your hand virtually and we will call on you. Let's start with committee member Kim.
Yeah, hello all. Hey, I just wanted to share a quick update from TriMet from our last May Board of Directors meeting. The board voted in favor of the proposed fare increase, and it will take place on January 1, 2024. And it was a necessary step to support the operating costs required to expand our services. And this decision also maintains the existing monthly caps, which means that frequent riders using hop cards should not be affected by the fare increase. So people using honor, citizen, and youth fares will, with the hop system, will continue to pay the maximum of $28 in a calendar month, which is the same rate as they pay today. And other folks with a monthly pass of $100 will remain a $100 pass as well. Just a public service announcement. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, committee member Kim. Councillor Wong, we can go to you.
All right, I can do the update if you all would like, or we can wait for Councillor Rosenthal, but I'm prepared to go.
Sure, you can go now. Thank you.
Okay, great. When we pull it up then. All right, so I'm gonna start with some updates from our Parks and Nature Department. So last month, council committed to providing up to $10 million from the Parks Bond for 3 major parks and nature projects in the region. So we allocated $3.5 million for the purchase of a large forest tract by the Trust for Public Lands in Oregon State University. We allocated $7 million for OMSI for the Columbia Intertribal Fish Commission and Prosper Portland for the construction of a waterfront education park in Obmsey's neighborhood on the Willamette River. And then a $5 million allocation for the Albina Vision Trust to work towards purchasing properties in the Albina district. So some great properties on the west side that meet community vision like objectives, as well as on the Willamette River. These are through our large scale community visions program, which was established by Metro Council to provide a boost for projects that increase access to nature for folks across the region. And we have additional funding available in that pot, which will become available in future years. So if you have complex community visions in your community or cities that might meet these goals, be on the lookout for those in coming years. Also in Parks and Nature, we have a Nature and Neighborhoods Community Choice Grants. And thanks to a partnership with jurisdictions in Western Washington County, the Community Choice Grants pilot in District 4 is off to a great start. So these grants will use a participatory budgeting process that gives community members a direct say in shaping the parks and natural areas in their communities, and will allocate $2 million throughout Metro District 4 in the coming years. So far, there's been over 100 potential project ideas, and voting by the community will be planned for later this year. We have some updates from the bulky waste pilot project. So Metro is collaborating with Clackamas and Washington counties and Beaverton, Gresham, and Portland to provide regular service to multifamily residences and lower income households who need help in disposing of bulky waste items such as mattresses. So far, a project team from across the jurisdictions have looked at local and national bulky waste programs and talked to communities, collection companies, and local governments. And the team's next step is to recommend a pilot project for multifamily residences beginning this fall. And that data will be used to determine future service standards for bulky waste. Let's see, next I have an update from our affordable housing bond. So a lot of production happening from a bond across the region. Earlier this month, we broke ground at Flambeck Gardens and Gleason Landing, which has more than 250 new homes coming online between the two, Flambeck Gardens in Tualatin, and then Gleason Landing in Northeast Portland, serving kind of the 82nd Montevilla neighborhood. These two projects include deeply affordable housing and also permanent supportive housing that's primarily serve BIPOC communities, seniors, and survivors of domestic abuse. And I'm also excited to share that Terrace Glen and Tigard will open later this month with an additional 144 apartments that will be available. And then finally, this past week actually was Waste and Recycling Workers Week. It began on June 17th and was a big opportunity for Metro and partners to celebrate our incredible teams who keep our garbage and recycling system running smoothly. So you might have seen a bunch of social media posts and other recognition for all the folks in our garbage and recycling system. We were spotlighting staff on social media, and also had some segments on K2 and also on keeping our workers safe from hazardous waste. Yeah, so that's the update from council. Happy to take any questions on any of those.
Great, thank you, Councilor. Any questions? Great.
I haven't logged in.
Thank you for the update.
I'm still.
Oh. Go ahead, Connor.
I didn't hear enough to know what to do.
We'll move on to Mayor McGriff.
Hi there. Yeah, I just wanted to report that over this last month of June, the City of Oregon City held two diversity and equity events. Our Juneteenth event, which was held on June 17th at our historic Carnegie Library. And then we had our very first community-sponsored Pride event, which was held downtown. And unfortunately, it was not without incident, and but it was not downtown. But just wanted to say how proud I am of our community for stepping up, and you know, changes are still being made and coming. And we shared some of those events with some of our neighboring cities. So thank you.
Great, thank you for those updates, Mayor McGriff. Let's go to Councilor Rosenthal. Would you like to add any updates?
Well, I don't know that I apologize for being late. Traffic, in case any of you was out there, is not particularly easy this afternoon. I thought I left with plenty of time, and I didn't. I didn't hear a lot of what I just wanted to mention. I guess I'm sure Councilor Huang covered almost everything. The parks, I think he covered all the parks issues, and he probably covered the bulky waste issues. I got the most recent information or data on the housing and supportive services, and it's moving along very well. Particularly, I think we have about 13,000 people that we've kept from being homeless. Some of it's on a one-time basis, and well over 1,200 people that have been taken off the streets. I think it's closer to 2,000. So that process is working, and we're working in coordination with the cities and the counties, but it's a slow process and takes a lot of time and effort. And otherwise, and I don't know, did Councilor Huang mention the success of the Juneteenth rodeo? I don't know if he did. If he didn't, I would mention that. It was a first.
Oh yeah, no, please. Yeah, I forgot about that. Sorry, Councilor, go ahead. I just forgot about that.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Thank you, Councilor Rosenthal. I can circle back and just say, just thank you to the staff. The Juneteenth rodeo was truly, truly amazing. And there's a few articles in the New York Times, and just want to personally say thank you to just all the staff from the Expo Center, especially Chris and Matthew and Paul Simon as well. And then also thanks to the Metro Council for those that were able to come and support the event. It was a resounding success, and the athletes felt loved, and it was a monumental event. So we did a good job here in the state of Oregon. So let's move to the consent agenda items. It looks like we're at quorum. We have two items on the consent agenda for this evening. We have 5.1, MPAC consideration of MTAC nominees, and 5.2, consideration of the May 24th MPAC minutes. Do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved, Callaway.
Second, McGriff.
Thank you, Mayor Callaway. First and the second by Mayor McGriff. All in favor, say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Great, thank you. Aye. Any opposed? No, looks like it passes unanimously. Great. And we'll move on to item 6.1, which is the community placemaking grants. To start things off, we're going to hear an update from Metro's community placemaking grant program. Since 2017, these grants have provided much needed financial support to groups who are using arts and cultural programs to strengthen people's connections to each other and the places they care about, making our region's communities stronger and more resilient. Senior Planner Dana Lucero will walk us through major elements of the program and ask for your help letting your communities know about this opportunity. Then we'll welcome 2023 grantee Chisao Hata, who is a creative director of the Living Arts Program at the Japanese American Museum of Oregon. Metro counselors Lewis and Wong serve on the grant review panel with 6 community members of color who are also engaged in this kind of work. And Councillor Wong will start us off.
Oh, great. Yeah, this is one of my favorite programs here at Metro, and working with all our amazing staff and community members that serve in the selection committee. In a previous role at Apana, we were successful applicants twice for this placemaking grant, and we used it to do a project to promote traffic safety on Outer Division and also kind of memorialize all the, traffic fatalities that our community saw. So this is really, art and placemaking with a purpose that aligns with kind of the broader values and goals that, Metro has. And just, I wish we had more money. It's $200,000, but, there's so much need and so many great projects out there. And I will turn it over to Dana to go through kind of an overview of the program and some of the highlights.
Great. Do you turn my mic on or do I? Is it on?
It's on.
It's on. Great. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm really appreciative of your time, and especially if just out to be here to share the Assembly Center project with us, which...
Could you press the button?
Oh. Sorry, it doesn't appear to be, the light's not turning on.
It's pretty dim.
We can hear you on this end.
Is that it? Can you hear me now?
Oh, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, great. Thank you. So let's go to the next slide. So our community placemaking program has been around since 2017. And the intention really, despite having funded so many different kinds of efforts, is that they all share this quality, is that the grants support community-driven, equity-centered, arts and culture-based efforts that strengthen people's connections to each other and places they care about. Next slide, please. Now, I don't know how many of you are talking about placemaking in your communities, and it certainly means a lot of different things to different people, and I think that's actually very appropriate. But we want to be very specific about what we're looking to support through the Metro program, and that is that you can be looking to really change your community, the way that places are used, the way practices are held, or you could be looking to safeguard what's presently there, potentially things that are at risk of changing for not the better. And we're okay with both of those as long as we're on the community-driven side. We trust that community understands what they need and that it's Metro's job to trust that and support that. The things that don't do very well through this program are one person's really great idea intending to benefit another group. The community-driven side is really the people who are receiving the benefit are the people who've conceived of the idea and are helping bring it about. Next slide, please. So the program has 4 different objectives. Placemaking is that definition we saw earlier on, where people's connections to each other and places they care about are strengthened. But equally important are the equity. We started this program after our racial equity strategy was adopted, and so we can be unapologetic about centering the program there. And then also partnerships, people are working together to make things happen, and leadership, because they're involved in making the work happen, they're naturally gaining leadership skills. And that, if you think about the previous slide of that matrix, that's really all built into what we want to see supported through the program. Next slide, please. So, like I said, we've done this since 2017. We're about to open up our 8th cycle. But since in those 7 cycles, we've given just over $1.2 million to 68 different groups to carry out their vision. Okay, next slide. So just a little bit of nuts and bolts about the program. We have, annually, we have $200,000 to give away. This has grown since our first cycle. We had $100,000. People can ask for between $5,000 and $25,000 in grants, and no matching funds are required. So this is a very unique opportunity to support community work at this funding level without asking for anything. They don't have to bring anything to the table. We also make it, have it set up internally so that people can receive their money before they start their work. So we're not only funding groups that are ready to do it, but we're funding groups that really couldn't make this important community work happen absent the Metro grant dollars. We do ask that people, a lot of nonprofits apply. Community groups that aren't a nonprofit entity may apply, but they must partner with a nonprofit fiscal sponsor. Public agencies, cities, et cetera, are also welcome to apply. And in that scenario, a really strong application is one where Metro's money is coming to you and going right out the door to community. And so a really strong interest in facilitating your local community's visions come true is where the public entities can be competitive. Next slide, please. We also have an evaluation component. A few years ago when I came to MPAC, we talked about that we were just starting this process. And now we've got several cycles underway where we've asked grantees to set 2 to 4 goals for their grant-funded work. And then we ask them at the close of their grant with us to tell us what they learned about those goals. So not were you successful, or like how many people showed up at your events. It's really tell us you have these important goals. Tell us so we can be better able to serve community, what you learned about those. So this is a nice example from Afro Village Home Base, which repurposed, is in the process of repurposing a Max car to provide services for unhoused Black folks. Next slide, please. Just to reflect on last cycle, we received 92 grant applications asking for just about $2 million. And so you remember we've got 200,000 to give away. What's that? Yeah. Yeah, a whole order of magnitude, really. So we said yes to 10 applicants and we said no to 82. And that's an unfortunate missed opportunity, but that's where we're at. Still this continues to be really well received and people are enthusiastic about it. So we accept traditional applications, but as we also can take video applications and we'll translate an application received in any language. Councilor Wong mentioned this a bit, that the people that make this decision or make the decision that they recommend to Metro, they are 6 community members of color, all of whom are artist activists, community leaders who are themselves in their own professional lives instigating change like this. And then with the 2 counselors, they use a consensus-based process to come up with a recommendation that balances community served, geography, types of efforts being funded. And like I said, we found a little bit more money because it was really hard to say no. So we awarded $208,000 to 10 different efforts this last cycle, Chisao being one of those we'll hear about. Next slide, please. So I want to leave you with this. Their next cycle is coming up. We're going to open applications in August. They'll close in early October. We'll announce awards in January. We'll have information sessions. My role is to be as helpful to applicants as possible. So if you know people, groups that you think this will be a good fit for, my contact information is in your material. More people are successful when they have a chance to interact and ask questions. And so I really encourage you to do that. Next slide, please. So your packet had the 23 grantees, and I won't go into them because I want to give us enough time for questions after Chisao talks, but there is a really good mix of geographies as well as creative visions to how to impact social change, how to make communities stronger. We have workshops for youth that use hip hop artists as well as Indigenous elders, a different kind of opportunity to have conversations about healing. We have 2 different markets that support culturally specific small business entrepreneurs. Next slide, please. And I don't want to get into detail, but our website shows describes all of these, and there will be lots of opportunities to, starting this summer, participate in some of these grant-funded events. So I'm going to ask you to save any questions until after we hear from Chisao, and then we'll see if there's anything that's helpful to talk about before we take our leave. Next slide, please.
I guess that means me.
Yeah.
Is this on? Are we good?
Yes.
Okay. I want to thank Dana Lucera from Metro for this opportunity to speak to you today, and thank everyone who's been involved in the opportunity to develop the placemaking project entitled the Assembly Center. So my name is Chisao Hata, and I am a 3rd-generation Japanese American, Sansei. The history of the Portland Assembly Center is part of the Japanese American story in America. Our story has been left out in history books, lesson plans, and statewide standards. We find ourselves in a time of reckoning, a time to acknowledge the histories and stories that have been omitted, minimized, or mistold. What some have called the bad history. We must work to uplift the many contributions from all of our communities. Together, we can all embrace the place that we call America. As an artist, I believe that social change can happen through the arts. The Portland Assembly Center, formerly called the Portland Livestock Exposition Hall, became the makeshift prison for nearly 4,000 Japanese and Japanese Americans during World War II. The animals were moved out and the Japanese were moved in. The community had grown in Portland since 1890 in historic Old Town, and they lost everything. The issuance of Executive Order 9066 stole our livelihood, family life, land, and community called Nihon Machi, or Japantown, and it never returned. The excuse for the incarceration was called military necessity. However, the laws prior to 1942 included laws in Oregon that prevented land ownership, citizenship, and denial of entry into America. People of color in Oregon know this foundational racist history that founded this state. And in 1942, Portland was proud to be the first Jap-free city on the West Coast. Now today, as I reflect on this brutal history of the Japanese American concentration camps and the beauty of the juxtaposition, actually, of the beauty of the resilience, survival, and kodomo tamani, which means for the sake of the children. All of us who have survived brutal histories have so much to offer. The native peoples who nurtured this land, the African Americans who came to Portland for a new life in a place they never heard of, Vanport. Many made Portland their home. Many of us have. Our humanity thrives in proximity, diversity, and living and learning what it means to accept differences. The term and the emotional impact of the Assembly Center emerged as a different light as I reflected on the word assembly. What is the history and horror of incarceration? Could we use the term to inspire new action, thinking, art, and expression? What does the word assembly mean? The true meaning of the word could produce a place of gathering for a purpose, not hold the historic pain, more aptly called prison. What characteristics lift our humanity towards each other? And what creates our community chest? Our ability to assemble, a place to assemble, and an active purpose to create a new meaning for the word assembly. This is part of my vision for the Assembly Center. This placemaking project, and to give it a creative process for reflection and healing, a place to gather and to pass on a legacy of hope to those who follow in our footsteps. Thank you for letting me speak to you today, and thank you, Dana, for having me, and thank you to Metro for the placemaking grants.
Thank you, Chisao. I really appreciate that. It's important to hear. And can we give them a highlight? I think that they will see the project in its manifested form in the next Vanport Mosaic Festival.
There'll be some iteration, I'm sure. It's evolving. Yes, and we were so happy to have some of the Metro counselors and people visit us at Expo a few weeks ago, and it's different when you're actually in the space and experience that space. So,
thank you.
Thank you.
So our last thing is just to help us spread the word, and we're happy to answer any questions you might have about the program or how to spread the word.
Great, thank you, Dana. Thank you, Chiso. That was beautiful and amazing. And you're right, you feel all of that in that space, and we did that on the Juneteenth weekend as well. So It's great. Are there any questions? We'll start with Councilor Sherman.
Thank you, Chair. And, really amazing work. And I'm very proud to see the resources we provided. I wish we had 10 times the resources to put out there. My question would be, I look, historically, it looks like Multnomah and Washington counties have had, a number of really great, very successful proposals, and Clackamas County has not. And I'm curious, is Clackamas County not, are the applicants not geographically diverse? And if so, how can we as electeds better engage our community so that they're aware of this and can be more competitive and take advantage of it?
I very much appreciate that question. We have had true challenges receiving applications from Clackamas County. Portland is overrepresented in the application pool, and Washington County, there's a fair amount that come in. And so we're very much open to ideas. I'll have 2 interns this summer, so we can spread the word. The Arts Alliance has been helpful in posting the opportunity, Clackamas Arts Alliance, but your suggestions are most welcome.
Very good. We've done a lot of work with the Arts Alliance as well. And so I never thought about reaching out to them. So, I guess we'll have to make sure this is on our city council calendar and agenda, and that we're trying to put that out there and really engage the community, probably through our youth council as well, might be a really appropriate place to kind of start young and work our way up the food chain. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Hassan.
Yeah, hi, hello. I would be remiss if I didn't say hello to a good friend, Chizao, and just take a moment to recognize how important and critical this work is, Dana. Like, just seeing the organizations that we're supporting and that we're working with, and Chizao's words around, thinking about what it means to reclaim history and help undo kind of the harm that's been done. It's so powerful. And I want to take a moment and just sit in that and reflect on that and just thank you so much for this work. So.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Hassan. I believe Mayor Callaway is there in person.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation, and especially Ms. Hata, thank you for your comments. And I appreciate the fact that you did call it a concentration camp, because an internment sanitizes it, and it's exactly what it was a concentration camp. So thank you. And thank you for just bringing this to us, the uncomfortable truth in such an important way. I had a question, Dana, if recognizing, that we have like 92 applicants and only 10 get funded, then do we also, so if one of these 10 who was funded this year or previous recipients from previous years, are they excluded from subsequent grants, or is everybody equal? So I'm trying to help out my friends in Clackamas County get a grant.
That's a great question. We've not put any restrictions on it that haven't seemed like we're wasting people's time. So the only ineligibility is if you've applied for an event, we ask you not to apply. If you are successful in getting grant funding for an event, we ask you not to apply the subsequent year. The groups who have been successful, there's been 3 that have been successful in receiving 2 grants. I think receiving 3 grants might be a bit of a stretch given the demand, but we haven't explicitly said that's not possible. Yeah.
Great. Good question. Thank you, Mayor Callaway. Mr. Gronke, and then we'll move on to the next agenda item.
Well, thank you for your presentation. It's a marvelous program. Bill Nato, many of you may remember Bill Nato and I were old friends, and I heard Bill's stories firsthand of what it was like in the concentration camps. It's hard to believe that we have that sort of thing going on in America. My question has to do with the overall program. What means of measurement do you have to make sure that your money is spent as intended?
That's an excellent question. We have, as I alluded, or as I pointed out, the grant project-specific measurements. We also have a few program measurements that are explicit. It's about advancing racial equity outcomes. And we measure that by the amount of dollars that are going to communities of color that are involved in the decision-making process, as well as the individual racial outcomes that each grant provides. And then the other two programmatic evaluations are building new partnerships amongst groups and then building new relationships amongst Metro. And so those are more of both a numbers count that yes, we can see that we've done this. We can see how many groups have applied each cycle. I think 2019, the number just stands out, was 468 different groups were coming together to be in that application pool, as well as the more standard grant administration metrics about successfully closing out grants, making sure all of the money is spent, et cetera. So we're doing our best to measure something that is, I'd say, a little difficult to put your arms around in terms of measuring outcomes. Great question.
Great. Thank you. And then lastly, let's go to Councilor Rosenthal.
Yeah, just thanks, Councilor Chair Jones-Dixon. I just wanted to say that being at the Assembly Hall is a much more mind-altering experience than just reading about it. And the presentation with the pictures and realizing that this 4,000 people were in what is basically a cattle barn was impressive and made me think a lot.
Thank you for being there.
Thank you.
Thank you for
all.
having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. Any additional questions, feel free to email Dana. Thank you for your work as well. So we'll move on to item 6.2, transit-oriented development program strategic and work plan update. Metro's TOD program has been a part of the region's strategy for implementing the 2040 vision for over 20 years. Program staff spent the past 18 months on a strategic planning effort to update the program to ensure that its funding is making a significant positive impact by supporting projects that set a high bar for both racial equity and sustainability outcomes. Staff presented on TPAC and MPAC at the outset of that process to frame the scope of the plan. Staff are here to update MPAC on the updated strategic plan that was adopted by the program's steering committee in April and are eager to share the next steps toward implementation. Andrea Pastor, Senior Development Project Manager and Metro, is here to present along with the grantee. Welcome.
Hello, Chair Jones-Dixon and MPAC members. I'm not Andrea. My name is Erin Key. I wasn't on your agenda, but I wanted to take an opportunity to introduce this very hardworking TOD staff member at Metro. I'm her manager. I'm the Urban Policy and Development Manager at Metro. We're really excited to share with you information about the TOD program strategic plan and the very exciting direction that it sets for the program in the future. And I won't speak much more than that, but I wanted an opportunity to introduce this topic and to introduce Andrea Pastor.
Thank you, Erin, and thank you, Chair Jones-Dixon. We can go to the next slide. So today we just wanted to talk a little bit about the program, introduce it a little bit for those of you who aren't familiar with what we do, go through the origin. It has been here at Metro in some form since 1998. So it has a long history, but we're also going to be talking through, how it's changed over the years a little bit, and then what this new strategic plan recommendations, the new direction that it's setting for our work, and then just how we're implementing it through our work plan changes that are coming up, and open the floor for any questions that you might have. Next. So just quickly about the program origins, as Erin said, it is intended to implement the 2040 Metro growth concept by building higher density and mixed use residential and commercial corridors along the centers and corridors, and create compact walkable communities supporting our RTP goals. It really supports the RTP in a number of ways, and it's something we talk a lot about. But expanding prosperity by reducing transportation costs and time spent commuting is one. Lowering vehicle miles traveled is another one. Next slide. It's a fairly small program. We have $3.5 million annually that we receive through the Federal Transit Administration and then through regional flexible funds. And those funds are then used for three main activities. One is gap financing through grants or for projects that come to us seeking funding if they're, a little bit short on their development funding. We basically calculate what a project is inducing in ridership for transit by basically what is the increased density over what we would expect to see in the market in that area. And that is correlated with the amount of grant funding that we allocate to that project. Next, we also buy land strategically along transit corridors. So, a lot of the land that we are still, in having development and planning was acquired during the various light rail development projects, and we coordinate with the investment areas plan as planning projects as they're developing new transit corridors. And then finally, we have an urban living infrastructure grant that is specifically for ground floor uses that are community serving. And those funds come from the interest earnings from our TOD funds. So next slide, please. Here, this slide really demonstrates just how the program has evolved. For most of its history, I guess to the left of that 2017 marker, you can see the blue bars demonstrate the market rate projects that we were supporting and the number of units that we were supporting every year. And then as you can see, in 2016, there was a market shift, and it's because the program recognized that there was a real need for supporting affordable housing in the region, as there was just an increasing awareness of the housing crisis people were facing. So the program at that point changed its work plan to really reflect the increased transit ridership that people with lower incomes tend to use transit at much higher rates. So we accounted for that in basically, demonstrating that increased ridership by supporting affordable housing projects at a greater rate. And the green bars show those affordable housing units that we were able to support. So that was one big work plan change that happened in 2017. And since then, we have seen just an incredible growth with both the Portland Housing Bond and the Regional Housing Bond coming into play. Our grant funds have been under a lot greater demand. So we've been funding many, many more projects and units, which has been fantastic, but we're also basically still constrained by the budget that we have had essentially unchanged for the program's life. So we really, in this strategic plan update, we wanted to make sure that we were focusing on projects with the biggest impact, since we have limited dollars and we recognize we needed to do more with them. Next slide. So this is an example of the type of project that allowed us to begin really focusing on. We started really looking at ways that we could partner with community organizations. So this, the Orchards at 82nd is at 82nd and Division, and it was a partnership with Rose CDC and APANO, the Asian Pacific American Network of Oregon. And it was a project that we, the TOD program purchased the site in conjunction with the Division Transit Project planning process. There was a lot of community engagement that was able to then inform the design of the building that resulted in 48 units of affordable housing. And it also has a 5,100 square foot community space on the ground floor, which allows the community to have gathering space and all kinds of services and community serving uses that we're really proud of, as an example. And the next slide is another project we're actually in planning and development for right now. This was an acquisition at 74th and Gleason that is also just an example of how we have evolved since the Regional Housing Bond came into existence. This will be developed with housing bond funds and will be a combination of both family units in one building and permanent supportive housing units in the adjoining building. The whole process was informed by a great deal of community engagement, including over 800 survey responses that we partnered with the African Youth Community Organization to really do some deep engagement in that community to determine what they would like to see. And so that informed the fact that we'll have ground floor workforce training spaces and a preschool run by IRCO, the Immigrant and Refugee Community Organization. So this really highlights how the program has shifted towards this idea of community empowerment, allowing community members themselves to have a voice in the selection of the developers and shaping those projects. Next. So since 1998, this is just kind of to show the impact of the project. We have investments around the region. We are, we only make investments along high-frequency transit service. So, we are across the region, but our map for where we can make investments is limited to those transit corridors, but we still try to have a great deal of geographic diversity. We've had over 6,000 units funded, and over 40% of those have been affordable housing units so far. We also think about the way that funding this extra density near transit results in land use efficiency in terms of really how we are able to grow our region in the way that we want to keep people close to transit and services and have those walkable communities that we all want to live in. Next. So at the beginning of 2022, we really kicked off our strategic planning update. We are required by our work plan to take a look at our strategic plan every 5 years, but this one we really wanted to make it a big kind of overview because we knew we wanted to incorporate a lot of the racial equity and climate goals that Metro has set for itself and incorporate them more fully and officially into the program. So we worked with our steering committee very intensely. Every month they would hear about a different topic, but we also did some early engagement with Metro Council and with TPAC and MPAC. The next slide. And from that early engagement, we heard, 4 big priorities. Maintaining the strong connection to transit. They didn't want us to really diverge from the goals originally set out with the TOD program. But they wanted to elevate those other priorities that the region has set for itself. We were instructed that the TOD program should really be looked at as an anti-displacement tool in the broader regional planning efforts. And there was a recognition that the region's continuing housing crisis really required an effort, a focus on affordable housing, particularly in those well-served, areas well-served by transit. And then they wanted to ensure that economic benefits, not just affordability, led to racial equity outcomes. So those were the 4 kind of main outcomes we wanted to make sure we were working in throughout the process. Next. We followed that early engagement up with some stakeholder interviews with previous grantees. And so we talked to both market rate and affordable housing developers that we work with. And we asked them, how does our program really influence your site selection? What does it do in terms of the other ways that you think about your projects? We asked them about the potential goals that we were thinking about for contracting equity and workforce tracking, whether those were feasible or not. We asked them about a number of climate sustainability features and the associated costs to make sure that we weren't working in new requirements that were onerous or would render the program unusable. And we finally really wanted to know about the application and grant process. We wanted to know whether, right now it's a rolling application process, and we wanted to know whether it made sense to keep that system or make it a more competitive process, potentially with more funds. So we heard from them universally that they definitely wanted to keep it rolling. So we have opted for that. So next slide. We also reached out to a number of community-based organizations, and this really came out of our work with the housing bond that we've been doing. We wanted to, with our experience doing site acquisition, we really have realized that where we can make the biggest impact is when we own the site and we can shape that those solicitations for developers. It's in those moments where we can really have the community come in and inform what those projects are going to be and look like. And so we wanted to really talk, have those conversations with community groups to see what are the qualities that they're seeing when they're partnering with developers. What are the qualities of an effective partnership, an equitable one? What are those compensation structures that we should be making sure that we're requiring or looking out for at least? We talked to them about the importance of ownership of the land, you know, and at the end, when we buy a site, we are then turning it over to the developer for them to then own. And we wanted to make sure that we understood, you know, whether having a community group own the site is actually a benefit to them. Some of them, it's a little bit more complicated than they're prepared for, and we wanted to make sure that, you know, we understood those dynamics. And then we really wanted to look at improvements that we could make to our solicitation process to ensure that we were getting the most equitable outcomes that we could. Next. And finally, we did a lot of engagement with other Metro staff, staff at the state, at the Oregon Housing Community Services, even staff at a TOD program in Minnesota, just really looking at the ways that other folks who do grant programs that are similar to ours or that have kind of complementary functions, that we were aligning our requirements and when it made sense, that we made sure that we could leverage resources effectively to make sure that the, you know, projects that we were funding were as impactful and getting the goal, getting to the goals that we're setting out for ourselves as much as possible. So next. After all of that, we finished up our draft of our plan at the end of 2022, and we talked it through with our committee, finalized it in March, and then they adopted it in April of 2023. And so the TOD program's new mission is now, Metro's TOD program makes catalytic investments to build climate-friendly communities near transit that prioritize the needs of low-income households and people of color. And you know, we're very excited and proud about this new mission statement. And it came out of a lot of discussion for a while. So it was a group effort for sure. Next. And then we also came up with 6 new program desired outcomes. The first 2 are, you know, mainstays from our, you know, long history as a TOD program. They support higher density, that supports transit ridership, places that are safe, convenient, and enjoyable. And then the next 2 are getting at the preventing displacement, increasing the number of affordable housing units, the economic benefits. And then finally, this last one around innovation in housing development and design to advance equity was really important to our steering committee. They wanted to make sure that the program could remain nimble in the ways that it's always been able to do, and still pursue, you know, a variety of types of projects in climate leadership, cost efficiency, and advancing equity. Next. So in terms of our recommendations, just quickly, the ones focusing on anti-displacement, we want to set aside a yearly amount in our budget for site acquisition because, as I mentioned, it's where we see that we are getting the biggest impact. We want to require affordability, strengthen partnerships with community partners. Next. Require contract equity goals, work with Construction to Careers Pathways program to pilot workforce equity tracking, require climate-friendly design elements that we'll have as a menu of options for developers to choose from, and then align our requirements like I mentioned. Next. Finally, we are changing our program to make the commitments earlier rather than be last in funding so that we can get, you know, making sure that those projects are funded contingent on results, but really being able to be the first in. And well, we're running out of time, so we can keep going. Finally, we're looking for ways to grow and make those grants go further by making them recoverable. So next, I think we can just leave it open for questions. We're doing our work plan updates, and we hope to be done by this fall.
That's great. Great, thank you. Excuse me, thank you, Andrea, for the presentation and Aaron for the introduction. Questions from the committee members. We'll start with committee member Gronke.
It's a marvelous program. What I was thinking about in reading about it and listening to your presentation tonight is, what means do you have to keep the market from working in its inevitable manner? The projects you have are the type of projects which occur to me are wide open for the market to move in and for gentrification to happen. And that in a few years, these apartments will no longer be available to low-income families. What means do you have in hand to keep that from happening?
Thank you for your question. It's great. That's really why we focused on site acquisition. We recognize that there's only so much we can do when we don't own the land and we don't have control over who is going to build the project. So we are focusing on that, and also just getting the regulated affordability that has at least a 60-year term, which is significant at least.
So Metro owns this land at the present time?
For some of it, yeah. We have land that we've acquired through, various, just investments we've made along transit corridors that we are then turning into, developments, housing developments.
If I can help clarify, we purchase properties in the locations that help address these gentrification functions that are happening around the region. We get to choose where we want which to buy property, and then we enter into development agreements for public-private partnership with strict requirements on those developments so that we can get the kind of, and by working with community, get the kind of development that the community wants and needs, and therefore supports folks to stay in place.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Aaron, for the clarification. Let's go to Councillor Hassan, and then we have time for two more questions from the room there. Councillor Hassan.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the presentation. I'm curious how Metro staff are coordinating with city staff on some of these programs, and just like what ways we can be better collaborators with each other and successfully leverage these efforts.
Yeah, that's a great point. We do a certain amount. We're the same team that does the site acquisition program for the housing bond, and so we do a lot of collaboration with city staff, all the participating jurisdictions. So we definitely get the word out, and the program has been around for so long that it's very well known. But yes, we definitely intend to do a lot more outreach now with the new requirements. As we know them, we want to make sure that we're making all the city staff aware.
Thank you. Let's go to Councillor Rosenthal.
Thank you, Chair Jones-Dixon. One of the things I thought you might have mentioned as the Planback Gardens and the terrace that's coming up, as well as the Heartwood, which was Aloha. Almost all of those have both Metro housing bond funding as well as TOD funding. And one of the things I think it's important to note is that the coherency between the goals for the TOD project and the goals for the housing bond, so that they aren't in conflict. But my question is, there are other entities that have TOD programs, and I believe I don't know if it's ODOT and TriMet. How close are we in terms of the goals? Do we have any conflicts, or are they pretty much in terms of, say, co-bid, in terms of hiring and construction and things like that, in terms of equity and development? How are we sitting in that regard?
I'm most familiar with TriMet's TOD program, and we are very much, we collaborate with them very closely. They are also, determined to have affordability in a lot of their projects, so we're mostly trying to figure out how we can best complement each other's efforts. But I I think that, we work with them all the time. In fact, we have a TOD steering committee member that's from TriMet, so they're very
Okay,
well aware.
thanks.
And then I'd just like to add that we complement one another because Metro's place in this area and the development of TOD is very unique. TriMet is limited to properties that are purchased through the development of transit, whereas we have more flexibility to choose our sites, and that makes our program unique and special and enables us to coordinate and not overlap, like you might be concerned that we're not competing against one another. We're operating in very different environments.
So, for example, we can cooperate on buying properties associated with the transit development, because we also buy some that are associated with that kind of development.
Yeah, for example,
Yeah.
when the light rail was built out to Gresham,
Right.
several large properties near Civic Station were acquired by the TOD program, and we've been able to develop that into a really great neighborhood for the city of Gresham.
Great.
Yeah, and we appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you, Aaron. We'll go with Commissioner Treese, our Vice Chair, Vice Chair, and then we'll go to Councilor Sherman and then close it out. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. It really is interesting. And I want you to know that I really embrace, and I was working with our LUT department, and they were talking about what great changes you've implemented and what a difference it's going to make, and the whole focus around affordable housing. And it's really a great approach and complements all the other things we're trying to do. The question I have is, as you look at future expansions, what creates priority for you? And being opportunistic is okay. If it's, an opportunity, I get that too. So, but I'm curious.
Well, I think we are focusing on looking at site acquisition along, corridors that we are currently planning. So we have 82nd Avenue, that's a big area of focus. We're looking at sites along TV Highway. We have, because we have active equitable development strategies that are, in play. And so we can really, help support those community outcomes that are being, kind of identified right now.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. Great. Thank you, Vice Chair. Councilor Sherman.
Thank you, Chair. Really appreciate the work. And I think from the challenge that the more suburban regions, try to navigate is that, we play by the same housing rules and have the same need for affordable housing and active development in a kind of a transit near location, but we are very disconnected from much of the transit systems. And quite often our conversations with entities like TriMet, they're effectively saying, hey, without the development, we won't be able to afford to place the transit there. So what can we do, or how can kind of TOD be morphed over time to provide a broader opportunity set for the areas of the region that really are kind of being left behind with a lot of this development? Thank you.
I mean, I think that this is exactly what the TOD program is hoping to be able to do. I mean, we really want to be able to support, we can support projects within centers, designated centers, that even if they currently are not, super dense areas, we want to support that, because it's kind of making sure that you're proving that a development can happen and that people want to live in that kind of development. So, historically, the TOD program has always gone in kind of first to shape the market. So we would, I think we would love to talk to you about your perspective on, the sorts of things that would be interesting to a city that maybe can't support the transit ridership right now, but would want to move in that direction.
Sure. No, I think that actually begs the question. So, in our area, we're building a new downtown core that we're trying to structure within the CFEC rulemaking and make it a walkable downtown location that in the future, at some point, there will be, multimodal connectivity. So I would love to have that conversation. I will certainly reach out. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you all. And Councilor Sherman, you always ask the best transit questions. We are going to move. Thank you, Andrea and Aaron. We're going to move to item 6.3, urban growth management discussion, middle housing potential. This next item is about challenges and opportunities for middle housing. As many of you know, middle housing types like duplexes, townhouses, and triplexes offer a great offer a greater variety of housing types in single-family neighborhoods. In response to new laws in 2019, jurisdictions around the state have been amending their zoning codes to allow this greater variety of middle housing types. This introduces new questions about how capacity or how much capacity a region has for accommodating expected population growth. Middle housing potential is one of the topics that MPAC will need to grapple with as we work towards making a recommendation to the Metro Council in a little more than a year for the Council's 2024 Urban Growth Management decision. Tonight, we are going to hear about some initial analysis, and we'll also have time for MPAC discussion of challenges and opportunities for middle housing in our communities. Depending on turnout, this may be small group discussions or a discussion as a committee. We are joined by Ted Reed, Metro's project manager for the 2024 Urban Growth Management decision, Becky Hewitt of Eco Northwest, and Jerry Johnson from Johnson's Economics. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair Jones Dixon, Vice Chair Treese, MPAC members. It occurred to me that in writing the chair's talking points to introduce this, he said everything that I would have said. So I think we should just get into it in the name of saving time. And I'll turn it over to our consultants.
Thanks. I'm Becky Hewitt with Eco Northwest. And if you can, I don't know who's advancing slides. Okay, there we go. So this is one part of our broader work that we're doing with Ted and with staff at Metro, looking at residential readiness. We've spoken with this group before about some of the look we've done at development outcomes and some of the expansion areas and town centers. So this is just another one of the topics we're looking at. Go to the next step. We're at the moment in the step one box here, we are looking back at past work we've done to help inform the modeling that's going to happen that Jerry and his team are leading. And that next step is going to be estimating middle housing potential as part of modeling development and redevelopment potential throughout the region. So middle housing will end up being one component of a bigger model. And so this is just sort of helping set the stage for that analysis and helping inform the way we think about it. Next slide. So partly we wanted to just look at what has changed in the zoning. Metro's generalized zoning categories until very recently reflected the general pattern of single-family residential zones graded by all these different densities and lot sizes, and that's just not the world we live in anymore. And so our colleagues at MIG APG pulled some information together from jurisdictions across the region in terms of how they have implemented House Bill 2001. If you can go to the next slide. So they looked across a number of different jurisdictions. This isn't all of the jurisdictions in the metro region, but a pretty good sampling of the larger ones, and looked at what they ultimately adopted and how that compares to what was required under House Bill 2001 from 2019. You can see that most of the ones that they looked at ended up exceeding the minimum requirements from the state, and some of the examples of what they did that exceeded it are shown here, but that includes things like allowing plexes on smaller lots than are required, allowing less than one parking space per unit, and allowing higher floor area ratios or lot coverage and things like that for middle housing, sometimes in higher density zone, or allowing middle housing in higher density zones. So applying it more broadly than is required. Next slide. We also had them look specifically at how the detached middle housing is regulated. So there's two ways that you could build middle housing detached. One is cottage cluster, that's sort of more intuitive, that's always detached. And with a cottage cluster, it matters whether that unit size is limited beyond just a 900 square foot footprint that's part of the state rules. So does it have to be 1 story? Is there a limit on the unit size, or could it be 3 stories at 900 square foot footprint, which is a pretty good size? That's bigger than my house, for example. And then the other way would be detached plexes. The state rules don't require jurisdictions to allow detached plexes, but many did. It's an option. And so if you can build a duplex that is 2 detached units, and then you can use a middle housing land division to split that lot, you now basically have 2 detached units on individual lots that are kind of like small lot detached housing, but it's technically still a duplex and middle housing. So these are things we're paying attention to because the market tends to like to, both people like to build and people like to buy detached housing. So you can see that most of the jurisdictions that they surveyed did allow detached plexes, and then a number of them allow cottage clusters without a limit on the size, although most did have a size limit. So between those two things, many of the jurisdictions that they took a look at do allow some way to build detached middle housing that might kind of be more like a compact detached home. You can go to the next slide. I'm going to pass it over to Jerry in a minute to talk about the model, but I'm going to just give a little bit of context of sort of how we think about looking at demand for middle housing and middle housing production. You go to the next slide. So overall, if we're talking about where middle housing could get built, you need a combination of land that is zoned for middle housing and sites where it will fit with its required parking, with its setbacks, with its landscaping. So you need the land and the public policy together to create physical feasibility. And then you need a combination of market, so demand for that product, willingness to pay the price, and the availability of capital to invest in that development and achieve a sufficient return. You need those things to create financial feasibility. If you go to the next slide. When we think about middle housing in an infill context and in existing neighborhoods, that could come about in a couple different ways. There's a redevelopment scenario where you have a low value structure. It gets removed and replaced with middle housing. There could be infill on some sites. If you have a larger lot, you might be able to build out back of it and keep the existing home in place or add on to it. And then there's potentially conversion where an existing structure could be retrofitted. That's a little trickier to model, and it's a little bit specific to what your house looks like. So that's not addressed in any real detail in most of the work that we've done, and it won't be really addressed in the modeling work that Jerry will be doing. Next slide. But it's also important to understand, so we'll be looking at, with the model, we'll be looking at market feasible, what's market feasible for development. The zoned capacity for middle housing in the region is huge, right? Like pretty much all of the existing neighborhoods in the region are now zoned to allow middle housing at a pretty high density. That's a very big zoned capacity. That is not the number we would expect in a 20-year horizon to get built. So when you start narrowing that down based on what's physically and financially feasible, where you've got a willing owner that is actually interested in either selling or developing that property, and then you've also got all the right site-specific factors, timing and particulars that, I would really rather do this other thing with my property just because sometimes you actually get development, but it's a lot smaller pool than that total. I'm going to go to the next slide and pass it off to Jerry to talk about how we're modeling this for the metro region.
Right. Jerry Johnson with Johnson Economics. The model we're working on, which was started a few years ago, but we're refining it and tightening it up, making it easier to use. Metro is called the Developer Supply Processor, which is an odd name for the DSP model. But what it's intended to do is to mimic developer behavior in response to changes in inputs. So what we've done now is we've changed a lot of the entitlements through the zoning changes that Becky was going through. And so the question is, what do developers do with it? How are they going to respond to these changes in the market? Is production of some of these middle housing product represent a highest and best use? If it does get produced, what does it look like? What magnitude do we see as if you take a look at it, you say every single family zone now allows 2 to 3 units. That doesn't mean we've suddenly tripled our capacity, although we theoretically have tripled our capacity right on the same property. But we know that's not going to happen exactly at that level. So what we do, we try to get this model is intended to get an idea of what the middle capacity is going to be utilized. We use generalized zones. Every jurisdiction's got very discrete zones. It's hard to generalize them. We've made an attempt through a bridge, which is an ongoing issue Metro's had before, to try to get some generalized zoning categories. We've taken a look at a bunch of housing prototypes, different ways you can do it: triplexes, fourplexes, cottage clusters, skinny homes, a lot of different product types. We take a look at the financial feasibility based on the rent curves, achievable rents in these different markets, what current construction costs are, financing terms, capitalization rates, try to figure out what they can support as far as residual land values and acquisition. We balance that against the existing supply of properties, both developed and vacant in an area. We've done some backcasting, and so we have these certain relationships between what the land's worth under new development, what it's worth under current development, and what percentage of these products we think will develop and what the form will be. So we can theoretically have a development capacity based on 100 unit per acre zone capacity and say we have capacity for 100 units on this site, but we know within the price constructs of 122nd that we're probably looking at maybe a 4-story wood frame with surface parking, which is probably going to yield a 35 unit an acre capacity, and it's only going to work on these sites because when we run the pro formas on these, those are the sites that make the most sense. And even when they work, we know they won't always happen. So there's a certain level of it takes a while for all these things to integrate. Eventually, this developer model will be balanced with a demand model. ECO's working on some demand pieces now. We're integrating those because to make sure if we can build 170,000 duplexes, it doesn't mean there's demand for 170,000 duplexes. If we overbuild a market, there's a price response, and suddenly that product isn't viable anymore. And so we've got to make sure the supply and demand side balance so we get an outcome that actually makes sense. End of the day, it basically gives us predicted outcomes of development, intensity, and capacity we think is embedded not just in vacant sites, but existing developed sites if we expect there be continued infill redevelopment in those areas. And some idea of the numbers and what it looks like.
You can go to the next slide. So we want to just give a few more examples of kind of what we're modeling specifically. So townhouses, we're modeling both ownership and rental for townhouses, using a typical density between 20 and 25 units an acre, and we're assuming off-street parking. Even, we talked about some jurisdictions aren't requiring off-street parking. We're assuming that it would get built because there's demand for it.
Do you have pictures of detached townhouses?
I think yes, in 2 more slides. Next slide. Duplexes, so again, modeling both ownership and rental, about a 5,000 square foot lot size. As Jerry mentioned, the specifics vary across all these different jurisdictions, so we're not accounting for every little difference in lot size in all these jurisdictions. And again, assuming off-street parking even if it's not required. And then next. So detached plexes or compact detached housing, Jerry was talking about sort of the skinny homes, and they don't always look like skinny homes. Sometimes they're arranged differently on a lot. For, the things you see now have more so been built under regulations where they had to have their own street frontage, and that made them more likely to look like this, long and skinny. But the middle housing regulations are not like that, so they won't necessarily be this shape exactly. But it's that idea of detached homes, but on very small lots. And so, for the model, on Jerry's side, it doesn't really matter whether they're this way or this way. They're just detached homes on small lots. Next slide. Because the modeling work that Jerry's talking about is still in progress, we wanted to give a couple of examples. ECHO has done work on middle housing with a number of jurisdictions in the metro region and looked at what might be feasible to redevelop within their territory under their regulations. And many of those were done before they finalized their regulations, so they're sort of an early look. But we thought they might be helpful just to give a sense of sort of scale, help calibrate expectations about what we might see. If you can go to the next slide. So one of these was for Washington County, who looked at urban unincorporated areas. Overall, we estimated about 3% of parcels would be feasible for redevelopment, but it varied quite a bit between different areas. And this was also before middle housing land divisions came into the picture and doesn't assume detached plexes. So this is maybe a lower estimate, on the lower end. If you go to the next slide. We also worked with City of Milwaukee to help them think about capacity for middle housing. This one does take into consideration land division and detached plexes, and partly as a result of that, and partly because they're kind of at an inflection point and they've got a lot of big weird parcels. We saw maybe something like 8% of parcels could be feasible for redevelopment, and then additional parcels beyond that, where you could see infill potentially. It was a little harder to estimate that, but we took a guess at something like 14% additional parcels where infill without tearing down that existing home might be possible. There's a lot of site specifics that could change that. Next slide. This isn't work that we did, but work that City of Portland did. As they were working on residential infill project, they looked back. They've allowed corner lot duplexes for a very long time. And they looked back and said, okay, out of all of the corner lots that allow duplexes, how many have duplexes on them now? And what they found was about 3.5% of those lots. Again, it varies depending on where they were. And that also does not allow them to be split. The lots can't be split generally for those. So this is, again, maybe kind of on the lower side of what you would see. It's just 2 units, can't split the lot. But that's a 30-ish year look. And then next slide, they also have done a 1-year look. This is also City of Portland's data, can't take credit for this, but they shared it with us. So they've done a 1-year look back at what the first year of their residential infill project phase 1 resulted in terms of middle housing production. So they've seen over 300 units of middle housing developed in that year. That's not a big number for a city the size of Portland, but that's just 1 year. And they are seeing 4 plexes kind of leading the pack there. And then if you go to the next slide, you can see a map of, it's a little hard to see on this screen, but those points are some of the places where the middle housing has been built. So you can see it's kind of in some areas where it's not like the most expensive areas, because the existing housing there is pretty expensive. You're not going to buy it and tear it down. But they're not the least expensive areas where maybe there isn't really demand for new housing. It's kind of those in-between places that are kind of in transition. That's where you're seeing some of those dots. Next slide. And then we also worked with City of Hillsborough to help think about what this might look like in a greenfield context, because middle housing allowed not just in existing neighborhoods, but on all the existing vacant land too. So overall, you would see developers in a greenfield include middle housing in their development because it can help them achieve a broader range of price points. It's a lot, if you can build a house for $350,000 and make money doing it, you will sell it very quickly. That is much easier than selling houses for $900,000. So if they can hit a broader range of prices, that's great, if they can still make money doing it. So when we looked for City of Hillsborough, based on kind of their market conditions and the type of land that they had vacant, on land that doesn't allow multifamily, it's just between the single family and middle housing. We estimated about a 50-50 split between single family and middle housing on that land. And then in the areas that are not yet concept planned, and so they could allow all housing types, we estimated it somewhere between 25 and 30% of that housing could end up being middle housing. Next slide. We also looked at what the pricing might look like for middle housing. Does it offer something more affordable than detached housing? So next slide. Overall, new construction is expensive. That's probably not going to surprise anybody. Middle housing tends to be less expensive, not 100% of the time, but it does tend to be less expensive. So you can see the purple bars here are things that you can probably not afford if you make less than 120% of the area median income. The red bars are 100 to 120, and then the very small orange bars that you can sometimes see are for 80 to 100% of area median income. So the townhouses and condominiums, it's not a lot of units, but some of them are affordable at that 80 to 120% of area median income range. If you go to the next slide, there's just some examples. These are small multifamily rentals and plexes. They're all new construction. They're from different parts of the Portland region. These numbers are a little bit hard to read. These are duplex through sixplex, basically. And they range from 60% of area median income to 120% of area median income. That's adjusted for like the unit size. So a studio is, it has to be, just because it's small doesn't automatically make it more affordable. It's compared for a smaller household size. But you can see those are generally hitting that 60 to 120% range. The next slide. These are compact detached houses that are actually rented. And these ones both happen to be in the 80 to 100% range, but they're also, they're pretty small units on small lots. Those are also still relatively affordable. If you go to the next slide, we have a couple examples of for sale. So these are all attached. They're 3 to 6plex or 8plex. And again, most of these are still in the 80 to 120% of AMI range. That triplex is higher. But you can see on the for sale side, at least for attached ones with pretty small units, they're still kind of hitting that 80 to 120% range. I will say the attached ones next to my house are very big and definitely over 120% of AMI. So this isn't all of them, but it does show that it can happen. Next slide. And go ahead and keep going. The things we wanted to leave you with, so the local regulations have changed a lot. You could theoretically build 20 to 30 units an acre across most of the existing neighborhoods. And it could, in theory, look a lot like high-density, single-unit detached housing. That's not necessarily what we expect to see, but that is possible throughout much of the region. And many of the jurisdictions go beyond what's required by the state. So some of them may allow even more than that. Next slide. And based on the work we've done in the past, we're thinking there probably is some relatively substantial potential for middle housing. If it's somewhere between 2 and 10% of lots or something like that could convert to middle housing, that's still a lot of lots. And then if it's part of our vacant land development, that's also still a fair amount of middle housing. We don't know for sure what the numbers will be out of Jerry's model because it's a little different approach and it's balancing a lot of other things, but I would expect it to show that there is some decent potential for middle housing. And based on the little bit of information we have, it's might be more likely to be some of those kind of middle and transitioning markets where middle housing kind of makes the most sense, where there's desire for affordability still, but in terms of what buyers need, that they're looking for a more affordable price point, but they are maybe willing to pay a little bit for new construction. And so some of the time you can get middle income housing out of your middle housing, even if that's not always the case. I think that's it. And then we can take any questions, and then you guys had a conversation you wanted to facilitate.
Yeah, I'll go ahead. Thanks very much for that. We want to pause to give you guys a chance to ask questions, but I also wanted to just reaffirm a couple of the discussion questions that we put in the packet. Obviously, this is really important information. It's new and different from the last time we updated the urban growth boundary. And so this analysis, this modeling, is going to help us learn about what the development potential is inside the growth boundary over the next 20 years. We're going to be doing that. That's what this model is going to inform, as well as the growth potential inside any expansion areas that might be proposed for coming into the growth boundary. So this is an opportunity for MPAC members to to think about the way this team is approaching this question and how they're thinking about doing that modeling before the modeling is done. So you have a chance to give us and them your feedback about this model, so that because the next time you'll see this information, the model will be done and the information will be spit out. So this is a chance to think about the assumptions that they've talked about today. So that's one topic. And then the other one is just to kind of reflect on your own communities and what you're seeing happen in your communities, and maybe talk a little bit about what opportunities and challenges you're seeing in your community around middle housing types. So why don't we start with questions?
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you, Aaron. We'll start with Mayor Rosner first, and then we'll go to Councilor Sherman.
I make sure is my mic on? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can
awesome.
hear you.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Great presentation. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate the opportunity to weigh in as you're working through your assumptions and what these models look like. So I had a couple questions along those lines. But the big one is, did you account for HOAs when you looked at the models and available stock for redevelopment or ADUs or converting a single family home into a duplex? Sherwood, we have about, most of our housing stock has been built over the last 20 to 25 years. So most of that is covered by HOAs that don't allow it, right? So
right.
I was just curious is that included in your model when you look at that?
We're looking for the overlay for that. We don't have a great inventory to date of that. I know the city of Portland's trying to work on one for the city of Portland. I live in an old neighborhood, so we have an HOA that's clearly not enforceable anymore because it's illegal in multiple ways. But I think my understanding is that the HOAs are going to still be valid within a certain time frames.
Yeah.
Yes, that's correct. Mayor, it's a good question. It's one that came up in rulemaking around House Bill 2001, what to do about those. And I think that those are not overridden by House Bill 2001, so they exist, and in some cases they may pose challenges to middle housing development. It would require extensive title research of individual properties to answer the question that you're asking.
Well, and the reason I'm asking it, my understanding is, because it's basically a contract that's in place before the HB 2001 went in place. But my concern is, I'm guessing in a lot of communities those restrictions exist. And are we going to have a model that overestimates the availability of lots for redevelopment? So that's where
it's an excellent point, and looking for ways to, and that's why it's good to ask this now, looking for ways to factor that in. And certainly in areas like Sherwood is going to have probably a relatively high proportion of HOAs because of its development in that time period. As larger developments in that time period where the HOAs are really prevalent.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's helpful, we can provide you a list of all our HOAs, so at least the areas that are at risk.
Sure,
if
you have, yeah.
Yeah.
So this came up for our work in Washington County. They have a lot of areas that are kind of that same era of subdivision. The thing that, and we did not have data on whose HOAs restricted what at all. What we did do, we knew something about like the era in which these, neighborhoods were built. And so we were able to at least sort of mentally flag, like see what's going on in that area. And if you're seeing a bunch of units come out of that area, put a big grain of salt next to it. The other thing that we found though was those neighborhoods that were like a pretty standard suburban lot with a pretty standard suburban house on them did not have a lot of redevelopment potential. Those houses generally worth some good money as they are. So if you're looking at what is the highest and best use and is this likely to turn over and redevelop with middle housing, we were checking for like, are those places, are we seeing lots come out of there? And actually those were some of the lowest redevelopment potential for Washington County. And I think we might see a similar pattern here because what we saw in our analysis was the things that were feasible were generally a pretty oversized lot. It was some of those weird leftover ones that were platted in when it used to be not so urban. And those big weird ones that have a pretty low value relative to their size those ones are a little more likely to allow for either infill or redevelopment.
Yeah, we've run this modeling approach before for the city of Portland with their RIPS program, and that's what it came out. They weren't even urban subdivisions, but even if the 70s, they were 10,000 square foot lots. But you've got to get the improvement relatively depreciated before you start seeing redevelopment occur anyways.
Right.
So it tends to be actually in areas that seen some level of disinvestment and have relatively large sites, or they have odd, you did the work in Milwaukee. Milwaukee is full of oddball sites.
All kinds of big weird lots.
They've got
I
really big
figured
lots.
When I was thinking about the question, it was a tough one. I would offer, as you work through the process and you start to get preliminary data for like City of Sherwood, our staff can take a look at that because we're boots on the ground and tell you where it might be correct, it might be wrong, or did you include this area? So we can really refine those models.
Yeah, it would be nice, and it's actually, it's probably at the parcel level where it feeds in, if we had a feed, but that's the kind of thing we could set into jurisdictions.
You don't have like a map or a parcel layer that's like, these things have HOAs on them.
We do have that.
Oh, well, send it
Well,
over. We'll
yeah.
drop
If everyone
it in.
had that, that would be
Yeah.
easy.
So much of our city is HOA. And then real quickly, I don't want to gobble up all the time, just a request and one quick question on the modeling. You talked about generalized zones. So when we talk to our community as we work through the middle housing regulations, and we're almost complete with our Sherwood West concept plan. Loud and clear, our community said, starter homes and cottage clusters. And why that resonated in our community is we have a lot of school-age kid families because of our schools. And what happens is they come in when they're young families, and as soon as their kids are out of school, they leave, and the cycle repeats. But we have a lot of people that like to age in place, stay in our community. So cottage clusters, for example, have a lot of appeal. So we're actually considering cottage cluster exclusive zoning because we understand that the economic models the builder looks at, cottage clusters aren't great.
No, they push up cottage clusters.
Yeah, so it would be great, and I know you don't, as you looked at the generalized zoning, it would be great if you include like duplex only or, those types of things, so we can understand that better. And then on the other side of that, it would be great to get some data out of this that kind of tells us what type of land use or zoning mechanisms will encourage the type of housing we need. So as opposed to, here's what it is, and this is what we're gonna get, what do we need to encourage the type of housing that we need out there?
Yeah, and that's actually one of the reasons for this modeling approach that it's helpful is you can change the entitlements and then see what the outcome.
Right.
And sometimes it's jurisdictions just decide whether it's worth the effort to go through this whole zoning exercise when it looks like no one's going to take advantage of it anyways, so why take all the political heat? Or will it actually move me in the direction that I'm hoping to go? But there's a lot of work to get it up to that point where it's working and.
Right. And, the developers hate it when I say this, but, to some degree, we have to kind of force the economics if we're going to get the housing that we need out there.
Yeah.
In some of those cases, but.
Well, and all you do, developers respond to rules, and we're change rules, they get a different response. So they're rational actors generally, not always, but
yeah.
they fancy themselves rational actors. And so you change the rules, and then they'll look at the potential outcomes, and it'll change their behavior, so.
Great. Well, thank you. Great question, Mayor. We're going to move on to Councilor Sherman and then Mayor McGriff and then Mayor Callaway and then Mayor Buck.
Thank you, Chair. Good information. I think, similar to Mayor Rosner, in Happy Valley, the bulk of our housing stock was produced in the past 25 years or so. And so, the opportunity for that infill is rather low in those, newer neighborhoods until those homes, have some significant disrepair, they probably won't be redeveloped. Where we are seeing some opportunities on the eastern side of the city, where we're seeing kind of new developments, and we've created a lot of very flexible, zoning rules in our like multi-use residential zones that allow for a lot of multifamily, a lot of more density. What I'm curious about though, and something that we've seen with our first couple of infill opportunities with applications for cottage clusters, and I think the comment was made earlier that middle housing is meant to be more affordable. And is it really as simple as just saying, it's smaller housing, therefore it's more affordable. Because on a per square foot basis, we're finding that cottage clusters, that duplexes, triplexes are substantially more expensive if you look at them on a per square foot basis. Maybe not on a unit basis, but per square foot. The latest couple of cottage cluster opportunities we have, they're presenting them at between $400 and $450 a square foot. So we're looking at 1,000 square foot units coming in at the $400,000 to $450,000 range per. And so, are we missing something? Are there opportunities that we have to work to make those, more competitive? I guess I'm just curious kind of how we optimize going forward to incent that type of building stock, because right now the developers really per our housing needs analysis conducted in Happy Valley, the largest need by far is single family residential. So that's kind of where there's a disconnect right now. Thank you.
Yeah, and the housing needs analysis will, the prescribed methodology will give you to that point in an area like Happy Valley. But one of the reasons I'm interested, I'm glad you pointed out on a per square foot basis, these tend to be more expensive, and there's some real reasons for these. One is the real expenses are kitchens and bathrooms. And so if you do a studio unit, if you're doing a rental apartment, that's your most expensive per square foot. It also tends to get the highest rent per square foot. The cheapest improvement is an extra bedroom with no bath, just as an add-on. So you have this inherent problem. You do have an issue that you're relatively smaller, so you're relatively more affordable. And sometimes you limit your external skin, and external skin costs more money than common walls. But increasingly, particularly if it's ownership, you worry about the sound deadening, and you really don't end up saving the money you think you're going to save anyways.
And I think they do, so they absolutely are more expensive on a per square foot basis. And also, that's pretty much the only way you get things cheaper that the market builds. Mm-hmm. The market doesn't just build a 2,000 square foot detached home and price it at $400,000 new construction just because people would like that, because they can't, that would not make money for them, and because they also can sell that 2,000 square foot unit for $800,000 or $900,000. So the only way that you're going to get that greater affordability without subsidy or some kind of incentive or some sort of specific financial public intervention is a smaller unit size or a really undesirable location or both.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good. Mayor McGriff.
Thank you very much. And hi, Jerry. Long time no see.
Oh, hey, Denise. I didn't.
My question quickly is, so one of the things I brought up when we talked about an urban growth boundary amendment some months ago was, are we taking into consideration a lot of development areas that allow for residential, maybe not zoned residential, but allow it? And I'm speaking of basically shopping centers that are underutilized, that have acres and acres of free parking that nobody's using. I hate to pick on my neighbor Tiger, but every time I go through there, I look at all these little strip centers that have maybe one business still existing in them. The rest is vacant, and they're on transit lines. And I'm thinking, for instance, the Oregon City Shopping Center, which has a huge bunch of parking that's not being utilized, also on a transit line, where we could put some housing there that meet some of this need. So that's something I'm wondering about.
I mean, all housing capacity obviously is helpful. I mean, how the market delivers affordable housing is not by design, it's by default. They tend to overbuild. You give them enough room and they'll overbuild the market, and then you'll get affordable housing. That's one way to get out of it. But basically, yeah, there's a lot of issues as far as transitions in commercial space and those corridors that have been an ongoing issue. They're hard to get at. Everyone thinks their commercial's worth a lot of money. Actually, if they saw industrial prices right now, it's actually almost more likely instead of residential, we'll see some of these retail things convert to some distribution because of the transportation access and large box utilization and the ability to move trucks, and they need certain footprints.
And Jerry, the model will look at all of both commercial and residential zones and as I understand it, as long as our generalized zoning says residential is allowed in that area, residential will compete against the other things.
Right.
And whatever the model determines to be the
Right.
highest and best use will win.
Yeah, so it has an entitlement screen. So if you've got a commercial site that allows commercial, allows industrial, and allows multifamily residential, they'll all go in there. And if one of them pays more than the other, the model will kick it out and say, actually, they're probably most likely to knock that down to put this in. And it may just be a reconfiguration of the retail, but I mean, retail is really tough because a lot of times the retail's in bad shape, but it just gets reconfigured to different tenant mixes and then ends up still roughly the same density. But sometimes we do get those conversions. So the way the model handles it is, which it's got this actually this giant matrix of ones and zeros. And if it's allowed, it's a one, and then the model will run that as an potential alternative and let it bid for it.
Thank you, Jared. Let's go to Mayor Callaway, and then we'll go to Mayor Buck, and then close it out with Councilor Rosenthal. And we have about eight minutes.
Good. Thank you, Chair. I won't take more than 7. So slide 13 talked about reference low value structure. So is that like our natural occurring affordable housing, or is that just kind of an abandoned warehouse, which obviously is not in a residential zone? But I mean, what is, I guess, a low value structure?
Well, I mean, if it's got a low density residential zone on it, it's probably not a warehouse. But that's more just a function of like where those zones are applied. What we saw in Washington County is sometimes it was an older house on a large lot. Sometimes it was like a barn or things like that. It wasn't a house. So some of those might be those kind of older, is it naturally occurring affordable housing? Maybe. It might not be super affordable. It might just be not that high value for how big a lot it has.
Okay. So then, with that kind of redevelopment or infill, there are some assumptions, that are made, and some of those assumptions seem high. And do we track, does Metro track, from report to report to report to see which, when land is assumed to be infill eligible or infill likely, yet report after report after report, it's not infill. Does that ever come off, the inventory? And we say, okay, these folks clearly aren't, this owner clearly isn't going to sell or develop. It's time to not include that parcel or those parcels anymore.
We don't do this parcel by parcel basis, but we have been doing it with the backcasting exercise where we basically run the model in reverse and go back the last 20 years and say, we would have identified these parcels redevelopable, what percentage of them redevelop every year? And so what it really has is it has this rate of expected redevelopment. It's a predictive model, so it just gives you percentage movement, and it just says parcels with these characteristics that make roughly this economic sense to redevelop, we see about 1.5% of these redevelop every year. So over a 20-year horizon, we may see 25% of these parcels redevelop. And if it becomes better, the economics, we may see that move up to like 30 or 40%. But what that gets to is the fact that just because it makes sense or it's possible, and even if it makes sense, doesn't mean they're going to do it. I've been working with the Rossi property forever out on 122nd. I'm in farm tax deferral. It's difficult because they don't need to do anything because they're in farm tax deferral. It's actually an area that's still hard to make the deals work because we're still trying to get something put together. But those properties go for a long time, and a lot of times it's difficult in a 20-year time horizon. You say this person isn't interested in selling, but things change over 20 years. People pass down. The heirs may not want to keep this property anymore, this farm. The state doesn't let you factor that in anyways, so this sort of backcasting is our best exercise of just saying, look, these are characteristics we think that would predict redevelopment, but we also see that it's not going to happen just because it makes sense. There's only so much of it's going to happen every year and let it trickle in. And then we can set it up to recalibrate every so many years. You can just keep giving the model more data, and theoretically it'll get better.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. We'll go with Mayor Butt.
Thank you, Chair. So, to Mayor Rosner's point, so about the HOAs and whatnot. So I don't know how many communities are engaged in the housing production strategy needs analysis work right now, but the work that we're doing, I mean, that's a big question that's come up, and so we're working with MIG as a consultant on this. On our HPS, and that's something that we want to have done. So if the various jurisdictions are doing that work individually, perhaps they could share that data then with Metro to help, what would otherwise be a very large and cumbersome process to help identify these various kind of HOA factors, because I mean, they do exist in all the communities. Two, we're having a tough time in LO kind of with the jumpstart of the middle housing. I don't know if that has to do with the land cost here or whatnot, but the community really wants it. But developers are redeveloping, but they're redeveloping single family homes into larger single family homes. And so that's something as we're doing our HPS, looking at, well, what are we going to have? Is this zone changes? But it's also caused us to look at areas that are already zoned for mixed use that are really, were zoned a while back when there wasn't such a focus on housing. And so, for instance, one of our town centers only allows 1 story above retail, and that seems a little absurd. So while we're, doing all this work to encourage middle housing, we're thinking, well, golly gee, one easy thing we could do is add a couple of stories in a town center on transit lines, where of course that would make a lot of sense, and then of course the market would redevelop that, and redevelopment is happening, but it's just very low scale on that residential side. So I think my comments would be that time will tell. I think as we move forward on this, and areas where middle housing is going to occur, just like Oswego as a city is seeing that we believe it's most likely to occur close to town centers, close to services. And so we want to step in and be able to provide the environment that is necessary to encourage developers in those areas, kind of mapping out areas, whereas like in a suburban community, like Lake Oswego, there's just areas that just don't seem that conducive to denser housing in general, very car-centric areas, for example, parts of our communities, but other parts of our community are very, very walkable and seem very conducive to this type of housing. So,
great. Thank you. Thank you, Mary Buck. We're going to go over just about 2 minutes or so. Councilor Rosenthal, do you want to close us out with your final remarks or questions?
Well, if you want to adjourn, you can. I can ask Ted and Aaron this offline, but I can also ask it. It has to do with some large developments in my area.
If
it's up to you.
Chair. Yeah, if you want to just send the question, if you can give it to Jeff and Connor, and then it'll be great to hear the remarks just in case it applies to any of us.
All right.
Okay, great. Well, we will adjourn. Thank you, everyone, for a great meeting. We covered a lot of ground this evening. Our next meeting will be on the 26th of July. Have a great 4th.